When I was younger, high school to mid 20s, I guess, I was into the party scene like lots of people were, lots of kids. I drank a lot and I took most anything I could get my hands on. When I was 24, I became a Christian and I brought my habits into the relationship with God. After wrestling with myself and God over my inability to stop my old ways, I made a move in life that made partying no longer an option. I went back to school and I started working on a Bible degree, sensing that God was wanting me to prepare for something. And that was in 1997. 3 years later, I became a pastor in a remote area of the country. The first several years were pretty good. And then in the summer of 2007, I ended up having back surgery for an old nagging problem. And 4 months later, I had another surgery, a second one on my neck. By 2008, I was struggling. My back hurt. I was having a difficult time leading the church as it grew. My personal relationships were suffering. I was losing confidence. I was losing focus, and I was losing heart. Virtually every sphere of my life was on shaky ground by then. Then one morning while I was working out, I had an explosion of pain in my lower back. And after trying to nurse it for a while, the doctor eventually ended up prescribing some pain pills. And they helped take the edge off the pain and they brought some relief. Of course, I'm talking about my back, but there was more to it than that. Within my life, there was a perfect storm brewing. Those first pain pills made the storm seem a little more distant and the pain of my life a little easier to bear. The final ingredient had been added, and it was only a matter of time before my old habits were being relived as I stepped back into the cycle of addiction. Within months, my life was spiraling, but only my wife and I would know it. I was deeply depressed. I lived with constant anxiety. I had to literally battle every morning to crawl out of bed. When the night came and everyone else had gone to bed, I would sit by myself, relieved that I had survived another day. Eventually, my wife intervened. She did for me what I wasn't able to do for myself. She was able to somehow give me this outside perspective to look from the outside in and see who I was and what I had become. Together, we found a place for me to get help. And I went through detox and rehab. And as I entered into that program, honestly, I just assumed that God would be dropping the hatchet on my journey. After all, I was a pastor, I was a teacher, a counselor, a spiritual guide. I was a person in our community that many people had put their trust in. And I had allowed myself to be mastered by a drug. And I was ashamed of that. I remember one of the first guys I met during treatment asking me, as we got to know each other, what did I do for a living? And I sarcastically answered, "Would you believe that I'm a pastor?" And without hesitating, he looked me straight in the eyes and he said, "Human first." I needed that. God didn't drop the hatchet. Instead, he continued to write my story. And through that time, I began to realize that I really didn't know who I was. One day, while looking in the mirror, I had my journal with me and I wrote these words on one of the pages. As I looked in the mirror, I said, "I see a stranger who I know painfully well." And from that confession, from that moment, God began a new chapter in my life. My story isn't over yet. it's not all a happily ever after yet. And I still have old ways of thinking that I have to work through, and there's still damage that I've caused to relationships that make some days difficult to navigate. There are still consequences being lived out in and around me, but I have hope. I have a rock to stand upon. I have life within me. I have a testimony.